because I belong to the Church of the Brethren. I was raised in the Beaverton Church of the Brethren up north in Gladwin, Michigan. And one of the things about the Church of the Brethren is within inside of our theology. We believe that all war is sin. Okay? The Church of the Brethren is one of the three historical peace churches. Okay, it's the Church of the Brethren, the Mennonites, and the Quakers. So that was a little bit of my understanding of growing up, as a kid. I was introduced to this conflict a lot of ways by chance. There was a gentleman who went to the Church of the Brethren and who still does. His name is Bob Schnepp. He went to the Holy Land in 2004. Okay? And Bob went with an organization called the Christian Peacemaker Teams. As you went in through and you saw this display, Loie Dickinson here had also went with the Christian Peacemaker Teams to the Holy Land. And I can't remember what year you went. What year did you?
2007.
2007 where we went. And so it's a very unique type experience to go with this organization. This organization was birthed out of these churches of the Brethren, the Mennonite and the Quaker traditions. And it was built on this idea proposed by Ron Sider, this old Mennonite guy. And what Ron did was he asked the question, what would it look like if you trained thousands of nonviolent activists the same way that you would train soldiers? People who are willing to be in conflict zones and willing to lay down their life, with the principles of nonviolence at their hand as they work towards peace. And so what Ron Sider did was he took this rhetorical question and he financed it. Right? And so that kind of birthed this Christian Peacemaker Teams. And so this Christian Peacemaker Teams, they have projects in Israel, Palestine, Iraqi Kurdistan, in Colombia, around the U.S.-Mexico border, in Canada. And so this organization puts, real people on the ground in conflict zones. And they do different things to de-escalate violence, to report on human rights abuses, to be physically present in these spaces. One of the things that they're well known for is during the invasion of Iraq, the second Iraq war. All right, there was 4 people from the Christian Peacemaker Teams, and I don't know if people remember this or not, but they were kidnapped in Baghdad. I think they spent about 164 days in captivity, being kidnapped. There was a gentleman by the name of Tom Fox who was part of the CPT. Okay, Tom was killed. He was killed during that hostage crisis. And after the hostage crisis was all over, Jim Loney and some of these other people that was part of that 4 group who lived through that hostage crisis, they were later interrogated about what happened during that period of time that they were held hostage in captivity. And all 3 of them refused to talk about what had happened, because what they felt as though is that they testified and they caught the people who was involved in this, they would kill them. Okay? So it's very important to know that this organization doesn't believe in that sort of justice. Right? Oh, you still can't hear me? You can't hear me? Or okay, all right. Loie's just checking up on me. That's why I love her. Yeah. So Bob had went to this conflict zone. He came back and was given this story about his time there, and it was really inspiring because I had never met, a so-called peacemaker, someone who was willing to do this as an act of faith, to pursue peace for people that he wasn't related to, that he didn't know, etc., etc. Growing up, I didn't know anything about Israel. I thought it was a mythical place in the Bible. I didn't even know if it was real or not, right? Because it's not tangible in my life. I couldn't have told you what a Palestinian was. I didn't know if it was a land or if it was a religion or a flower or anything, all right? Just the word Palestinian was never part of my history or my vernacular. Okay? So after the presentation, I walked up to Bob and said, Bob, hey, good job. It's really neat. Because that's what you do after someone gives a presentation. That's compulsory to say thank you. Okay? So after I said thank you, Bob goes, Cody, maybe this is something that you should do. In which I quickly told Bob, hey, Bob, I would, but I don't have the money. In case Bob quickly retorted, well, if it's just about the money, then I'll pay for you, all right? So Bob roped me in. And so next thing I knew, I had my ticket punched to Tel Aviv, in which I was going to spend 2 weeks in this land, okay? And having grown up in Gloucester, Michigan, in a community that's, mostly all white, this was the first time that I had experienced, structural racism and discrimination. Right? Because I'm walking through the streets and I'm able to go into places that my Palestinian counterparts simply cannot. Simply on the basis of their skin color and their name and their religion and all the preconceptions that goes with them. Right? And it was shocking for me. It was shocking for me. Right? And for me, I realized that this was really a big deal. This was really a big deal. And it was going to take a lot to understand, because what I realized is that, that soldier that was standing there, stopping these Palestinians, right? He wasn't necessarily stopping these Palestinians because he hates them, right? And so that kind of broke me out of a mold, with inside of this Christian framework of if we can just get people to love each other, right? This conflict is not rooted in the absence of love. And a lot of times that's a hard truth for people to kind of understand. It's not as simple as if we can just get more people to love each other, right? A lot of that violence that happens over there is not as a result of hate, but because of complacency and disinterest. Not because of hate. Okay? So having experienced all of that, I knew that I had to continue to keep working. So I got involved with an organization called the Israeli Committee Against Home Demolitions. This is an organization ran by an Israeli Jew. Okay? His name is Jeff Helper. And Jeff said, hey, what we're going to do is we're going to rebuild Palestinian homes that have been demolished as a result of this conflict. Not simply as an act of humanitarian aid. Yes, Palestinians need homes, right? But in doing it this way, right, we was changing a lot of the discourse around what peace and justice work actually looks like. Because we were rebuilding these homes illegally, right? Meaning that we were not applying to the Israeli civil administration to build homes. And that's a really hard thing, I think, sometimes for people to grasp. Although what we was doing was illegal, it was moral, right? Now let me explain to you the morality of that, okay? Last year, Palestinians had applied for some 12,500 permits to build homes. Only 57 were granted, all right? Okay? Meaning that if you are a Palestinian living in different areas of the West Bank and East Jerusalem, you have less than a 1% chance to be able to build your home legally. Okay? So it makes sense. Why do you spend all of this money in a process in which you have less than a 1% chance of getting your application? We might as well hang out here in Kalamazoo and buy lotto tickets all day, right? It's the same type of gig. And so when I say that we're doing things illegally, that makes people feel real uncomfortable, because then we have to struggle with that idea of what's legal, what's illegal, what's moral, and what's just. Because a lot of times the things that are legal is unjust. And we're seeing that happen right now across the border, right? So I'm okay with saying that I do things illegal, right? Because that's the step that we all have to start having is what is moral, and are we willing to do illegal things to usher in a new era of justice? But I want to make clear that although I say that I do things that are illegal, I do things that are nonviolent. I never advocate for violence, ever. Ever. Never do I ever advocate for violence. And I never condone violence as well. So having worked for the Israeli Committee Against Home Demolitions for a lot of years, I still work for this organization. I developed a relationship with the boss, Jeff's daughter, and I have a son. So this is my son. So I am also the father of a little 6-year-old Israeli Jew. So I also navigate that space of working with inside of the Palestinian communities, but also living in Israeli society, trying to figure out how do I raise my son in a way that's ethical and moral, and he engages in this conflict in a meaningful way, right? And this is just one photo among many. Before I came here, there was a protest in Jerusalem, which, there was a handful of Israeli Jews that had got together and said, these extrajudicial killings along the Gaza border are unjust. There was a handful of people out there holding signs and whatnot. It's a token response for what's going on in Gaza. But we showed up because it's important for my son to be in those spaces. She was talking about the women in black. My son goes to the women in black protest probably once or twice a month with his grandma. Okay, and so here in this photo, here's another photo of my son. This one would have been about 2 years ago. No, that's 4 years ago. 4 years ago. So my son was 2 at the time. You can go ahead and pass that around. So I just wanted to say all of that. That's my life, and that's how I tried to look at this conflict. So how we'll move forward is, I'll talk about some of the misconceptions I think that we have about this conflict, okay? And kind of unpack how this conflict impacts real people on the ground through this village of al-Khair. And I will offer up some ways that we can move forward, okay? A lot of us have seen this map. And we can go back and talk about a long history of this conflict, okay? But that's not what we're going to do. We're gonna start, basically in the 90s, all right? This map, in a general way, shows the way in which the Jewish population has migrated over time, and then in return has gained access and control of land and resources, and what those realities kind of look like over time to what it is now. Right? So in the 90s, the Israelis and the Palestinian PLO had signed a peace agreement called the Oslo Accords. And the Oslo Accords were signed, with the thoughts, or what the argument was, is that if we create 2 states for 2 different people, that's going to be the way in which we create peace. Right? So what they said is that, okay, we'll cut out this little kidney bean shape here in the West Bank, that little green area. And then there's so many people in Gaza that the Palestinians are also going to have to manage that. But because they're Palestinians, they're not really ready to have a full state of their own. So we're going to create this transitional period. And if the Palestinians are really good, right, then what we'll do is we'll give them a full state. And so over this period of time, right, the Israelis and Palestinians are in negotiations about how do we allow Palestinians to have their full state. Well, during this whole period of time, Israel is dumping all of these settlements into the West Bank, into what was supposed to be a Palestinian state. And so the reason why this map is problematic is that this is the map that we are routinely shown in the news, okay? But what this map doesn't show you what this map suggests to you is that there's a state of Israel and there's a state of Palestine. And so immediately your mind goes to think